Okay, can you see that? Okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Book of Mormon perspective class. It's nice to see so many people here and appreciate your attending tonight. Paul and Rena are in Nauvoo, working on the Nauvoo, and Robert is coming to us from Onset, Massachusetts tonight. So with their lack of internet, shall we say, or not the best of internet, they've got me trying to do some stuff here tonight. So appreciate your patience with that as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and I'll share with you what Paul has prepared for the presentation tonight. George Potter is our presenter tonight, and George has shared with us that he has recently lost his daughter just last week. She passed away, and so we are very thankful to George under these circumstances to be willing to come and share with us in our condolences for your loss, and we'll keep you in our prayers. George has presented the land of Nephi and the Book of Mormon in Arabia in his previous sessions with us on the forum. He comes back to share what he sees as Jaredite influence in South America. His book, Discovering the Amazing Jaredites, Cedar Fort, Springville, Utah, 2020, further postulates a close relationship between Summer and the Jaredites, making them pioneers in civilization. Ancestral impulse giving rise to heaven and earth, life, its human rendition, whose nudges through the mystery of history have led us to appreciate the great divine mission, to lead people to eternity, the ultimate land of promise, and to offer hope for the righteous quester who finds himself in the abyss. Our ancestors have moved across land and sailed across the sea in quest to fulfill their choice of where they would like to be. Settling islands, the Arctic, the forests, mountains, and plains, traveling to see the sights, marveling at Mother Earth's beautiful refrains. Our speaker this evening, George Potter, has traveled across the sea and gathered evidence of what occurred 2,000 years BC. We ask your blessing as we share the questions that clearly must arise, as we review those who responded to you to claim the Promised Land prize. For we too would follow you, be led to our Promised Land, align our lives with the eternal prize, in touch with your sacred hand, to learn the lessons of our distant past, to apply to our current mission, to ask your blessing on our gathering and beyond. This is our petition. In the name of Jesus the Christ, amen. George, the floor is yours. And you'll have to unmute. Where'd George go?
Okay, somebody muted me. I'd like to give you my phone number in case there's a problem. I actually gave a Zoom presentation one time and talked for 45 minutes and no one could hear a word I said. So if something goes wrong, my phone number is 385-219-1948. I appreciate all of you coming out to listen to me. This is going to be probably kind of a different presentation than what I gave before, because we're talking about the Jaredites, and there's just so little to glean from the scriptures as to where they came from, when did they go, and when did they leave, and where did they go. So I'm going to try my best to put together a proposition as to where they ended up. So bear with me. There'll be a lot of questions. In fact, I'm going to go now to PowerPoint, and you're going to see the title is Questions and Answers, more than anything that's firmed up. So let's Okay, can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, a
We can
journey
hear you.
of questions and possible answers. Before this is kind of completing my quad. I did with Richard Wellington, Lehi in the Wilderness, where we spent 5 years retracing Lehi's trail in Arabia. Then with Captains Frank Linehan and Comrade Dixon, we wrote the book on the voyages of the Book of Mormon, which is fascinating. And then I made the presentation before on Nephi and the Promised Land, my theory that the Book of Mormon took place in Peru. So this latest book then is Discovering the Amazing Jaredites. There's a couple hundred footnotes there in the book from scholars, historians, etc. So, what you'll see tonight is probably a really quick presentation, but in the book itself, I think it lays out pretty smoothly and fairly logically my theory about the Jaredites. Where did the Jaredites begin their journey? Well, this is a map of the kingdom of Nimrod. And you see this shaded area in here is where the Persian Gulf, or I call it the Arabian Gulf, used to go. And people believe that the ziggurat or the Tower of Babel was located here close to the sea. This is the land of Shinar in the kingdom of Nimrod. And this is dated here 3,200 to 2850 BC. When did the Jaredites begin their journey? Well, it says in the book of Ether, which Jared came forth with his brother and their families and some others and their families from the great tower at the time the Lord confounded the language of the people. Well, if you look at the Torah believes that the tower was built 1,656 years after the creation. But that raises, of course, another question. When was the exact date of the creation? And that we don't know. Perhaps archaeology can help us. We know they came from the land of Shinar and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, go to, let us make brick, and burnt them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and slime, which is mortar. Had they, it's not slime, it's actually pitchum or tar, had they for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build a city and a tower. Now, if we look at archaeology, the first cities in Mesopotamia date back to about 3,500 BC. We know that there's an invasion of Akkadians in around 3000 BC, which confused the languages in that area. We know that baked bricks were not used anywhere in architecture until about 3000 BC, and pitchum, slime, or asphalt was not used for mortar. The earliest dates back to 3100 BC. The first tower or ziggurats that were built in Shinar date back to between 3,500 and 3000 BC. So roughly we can speculate that the tower took place somewhere around 3000 BC. Where did the Jaredites go first? Well, they were told by the Lord to go northward to the valley of Nimrod, and there the Lord would meet them. He didn't say they went north. He just said, just go to that valley and go northward, where I will meet thee. So again, here's where the tower is located. Here's the kingdom of Nimrod and Shinar. So probably somewhere in here, the Lord met the Jaredites, and there they gathered their provisions. Where did they go next? It didn't say, there's no direction given, north, south, east, or west, from where the Lord met them and they gathered their provisions. But it's interesting, and it came to pass that the Lord commanded them that they should go forth into the wilderness, yea, into that quarter there never had man been. Now I read that was just a key living in Saudi Arabia. And we know from Old Testament text that when the word wilderness is used, it usually meant desert. So they went into the desert, that quarter where there never had man been. Well, this is the oldest map known in the world. It's a clay map from Mesopotamia. The Mesopotamian world is divided into 4 quarters: Babylon, Egypt, India, and the desert of Arabia. Those are the 4 quarters of ancient Mesopotamia. Now, living in Arabia, it was quite obvious to me what one of the possibilities was, and that is the Rubicali, which is known as the empty quarter. Why is it called the empty quarter? Because there's no sign of any permanent dwellings in that entire area. The empty quarter, by the way, is huge. It's the size of Utah. So I speculate that they left the Landus Sinar, traveled first to the Persian Gulf on rafts, stopped somewhere around UAE, and then from there they crossed that quarter where no man had ever lived, crossed the Rubicali, and then landed here. The only trail that existed there would have brought them down to Korori, the same place I speculate that Nephi built his ship. Any reasons to believe the Lord led the Jaredites to Korori? Well, it's known to have been an ancient port since 3000 BC. It has calm waters for building and launching ships. It's full of fruit. We know the Jaredites brought down with them their seeds and their fruits. So this is the one area in Arabia where the monsoons hit, and you have this very fertile area where fruits are existing. This is a cave near the waterfall at Korori where wild honey is still being gathered in these caves. We know the Jaredites had deseret or honey. There's a tradition of metalworking there. We know that the Jaredites were metal workers. They made weapons and they made plates of gold, which they inscribed on. There have been 4 iron smelters found at Korori and also 1 bronze smelter. Those smelters, though, they don't date back to the time of the Jaredites, but we know there was a tradition of metalwork there. This is a stone I gathered there. In the mountains there, they have a very clear, transparent stones. And we know that the 16 stones are transparent. The mountains that surround that area there, Korori, are called the Mar and Kamar Mountains. There's the Mar Range, and then there's the Kamar Range. Okay, we know that they built their ships where? At Moriankamur. So we have Mara Kamar. Again, here's a map, Mora and the Bay of Kamar, Mara Kamar. Okay, we have here again the land of Mara and the Bay of Kamar. So what do we know about the people of Mara? Are they called the Jaredites? Well, they actually were. They were called the Jerakonami, which means people of Jera. In fact, Glazer says in his book, Jera, the people who lived in Mara or in southern Oman are called Jera, actually Jaredites. I'll explain that later. What are the origins of the people who lived in that area? Ali Shari wrote, the Mara, I'll call them the Jaredites, originated from the remnant of the people of Ad. When God destroyed these various communities, Tower of Babel, these were saved and lived in the mountains of Zafar, Dhofar being that region of Oman. They are a tall, handsome folks having their own language, which none can understand. We know that no one but the Jaredites could understand their language. Okay, so is there any archaeological evidence that supports the idea that there was a group of people who left someplace and then located there at Korori? Well, yes, the archaeologists there showed that the Bronze Age occurred in Korori at circa 2500 BC, give or take a couple hundred years. So we have the the Stone Age ending and the Bronze Age beginning in that area right at that time. So technology being brought from, say, Mesopotamia down to that area, including bronze work, also large farming, irrigation, other things just happened about that same period of time. So this would have been the first part of their journey, as I see it. They left Mesopotamia. They went on river barges made of reeds sewn together. And these they could use in the Arabian or Persian Gulf because the waters are very calm. Landing again at UAE. From there, then they had to cross. The second leg would be the crossing of that quarter or that wilderness where no man had ever lived, the empty quarter. Is it possible that the Jaredites could have crossed the empty quarter? Well, the sand dunes in the empty quarter go from 700 to 800 feet tall. I have been out in the empty quarter several times. It's a larger sand desert than the state of Utah. It's just a sea of sand dunes, bigger than the state of Missouri, bigger than the state of Utah. You can imagine how huge this is. And the temperatures can go up to 140 degrees in the summertime, the sand temperatures. How could the Jaredites have crossed that? It's quite a leap of faith. Also, the fact that they couldn't have used camels because camels weren't domesticated at that time. And also camels do not do well on sand dunes. They're top heavy and they just fall over slip faces. So camels weren't the solution. The key is that Arabia was greener at that time. This is common knowledge that the temperature changed dramatically since 3000 BC. It was green at that time. There were rivers and lakes. We go out there into the empty quarter looking for arrowheads because they used to go hunt birds out in the empty quarter in the lakes that were there. Why? Because the monsoons were greater at that time. They could cross over the shoreline mountains. There's more rain, okay? And slowly, as the monsoons weakened, it became the great sand desert. So this is the only trail that is known to have existed through the empty quarter. It's called the Dakaki Trail. We followed it quite a ways into Saudi Arabia. We didn't quite make it down to Oman, but the key is that was the only place where you could go where there weren't great sand dunes. This is Jim Anderson and I. These are petrified wood because there used to be forest out here. But this is like, millions of years ago that they had these great forests in the empty quarter. This is a painting here, which we believe is of a donkey, and it's found in the empty quarter. And indeed, there is a well in the middle of the empty quarter called the Donkey Well, because again, they used to use donkeys to cross it. Today, donkeys cannot cross it because there's no fodder for the donkeys to eat. But this probably would have been the means the Jaredites would have used if they crossed the empty quarter. They would have used the donkeys. Is there an ancient written record that collaborates the Book of Mormon story of the Jaredites and their possible journey to Korori? Well, let's go to the Book of Ether here. When Moroni was translating the Book of Ether, he wrote the following. And as I suppose that the first part of this record, which speaks concerning the creation of the world and also of Adam. So those things were in the Jaredite plates to begin with, and an account from the time even of the great tower and whatsoever things transpired among the children of men until that time is had among the Jews. So Moroni is saying the Jews have a record of the Jaredites, and therefore he's not going to translate it. Therefore, I do not write those things. They're already in the Bible, so why should he write them? And indeed, the story of the Jaredites in the Bible ends at the tower, and it's not mentioned thereafter. Let me explain. In the Genesis chapters 10 and 11, they write about about the Tower of Babel and the people who were the descendants of Noah, called Jaredites. Explain here from Genesis. Peleg lived when the world was divided. Peleg's brother was Joktan. Joktan had 13 sons. The fourth son was Jerah. The 11th son was Ophir, and they lived from Mesa as thus goes into Zephyr, a mountain on the east. I'll get back to that later. Let's talk about the Jaredites. Okay, so this is from a book called the Bible in Arabia, I think, by Reverend Forster. And he is the lecturer, or was a lecturer at the Cathedral of Christ, Canterbury in England. Okay, at the time of the confounding of the languages, he writes that Jerah led his 11 brothers to southern Arabia. Now, there are many different spellings of Jerah. Indeed, the Smith's Bible Dictionary, 1863, states, Jared is the Jerah. And many of the old Bibles, instead of spelling it Jerah, it was spelled Jared. So Jared led his 11 brothers into southern Arabia. LDS Bible Dictionary states the Jaredites were settled in the south of Arabia. And we get the same from the Greek record as well, that they were settled in Oman by the river Zar. The only river that flows in southern Oman is the river that forms Korori, the inlet of Korori. That's the only flowing water or river you have in all of southern Oman. It's found again on the plain of Dhofar. And in fact, the language there of the people, the original Southern Arabic, says it's Ejerabia. Okay, so here's the premise that I present. Biblical Jared and Book of Mormon Jared were the same person. Okay, then that would mean that the brother of Jared in the Book of Mormon and Ophir, the younger brother of biblical Jared, were also the same person. So you have the Jaredite record in the Bible, and then it ends at the tower, then that story is picked up in the Book of Mormon. In fact, both sacred records are confirming each other. Here's the theory. The brother of Jared went through the veil and saw the Lord, thus receiving a new sacred name. Therefore, the Book of Mormon record, written in the Promised Land, does not use the old name, nor the new sacred name, but only refer to him as the brother of Jared, which is really quite unusual that someone's just called a brother of somebody. He went up to the mountain with 16 stones as Ophir, but came down the mountain as the brother of Jared. The Bible. Jared had a brother Ophir who had a harbor named after him. We've probably heard of Ophir, the famous harbor mentioned 10 times in the Old Testament, the harbor of Ophir, named after the brother of Jared in the Bible. Okay, what does the Book of Mormon say? The Jaredites built their ships at a place named after the brother of Jared, Moriancumer, right? Honrai Moriancumer, the sacred name of Ophir, I'm contending, okay? So both these brothers of Jared had a harbor named after them. This is linguist Ali Ashari. Okay, Ali is a very good friend of mine. He lives there in Oman. He grew up in Korori in the Wadi Dhofar area. And he's written 13 books on the language and of the Southern Arabic, and also of the petroglyphs that he's researched in the mountains. He's lectured at BYU. At the request of LDS Family Search, he allowed his genealogy to be recorded. His genealogy is found in this book, which I have a copy of. And just sort of thumbing through it, I was kind of shocked when I saw his book. Because again, he grew up at Korori, and this is his genealogy, okay? It goes directly back, all the way back to Ophir. So here we have Korori, the people who live there, claiming their forefathers go all the way back to Ophir. And of course, Jared as well. This is a map that's found in his book. This blue area is the area number 2, which is down here is Ophir. The yellow area is Jared, we'll call it, okay, the land of Jared, and this is Us over here in this area. Now this is only about 10 miles in width, so it's a very small area where he claims the tribes, the sons of Oktan, settled here in Oman. Okay, Genesis 10:30 says, and their dwellings was from Musa, as thou goest unto Zaphar, a mountain of the east. Well, again, what do we have here? This is the map of the area. Zaphar is, Bible scholars believe, is Dophir. Mesa is the old Greek name for Korori. And we have Mount Shambam in the language of Southern Arabia means actually the mountain of the east. So there's some possible collaboration there. Does the Bible support Shari's genealogy? Well, we know that the Yoktanites settled in Southern Arabia. And one of the sons of Yoktan was Zul or Zu. Zeus was a friend of Job, okay? And he was from the land of Job. Job's other friend was Zophar, which is again associated with Dhofar, the region of Oman there. Again, the scriptures related to it. Well, if you ever come down with me to Oman sometime, I'll take you to Job's tomb. At least this is one of probably a dozen places that claims to be Job's tomb, but I find this one very interesting. And here's why. We have here the 3 areas, okay, from the 3 sons of Yoktan. This is Job's tomb. Here is Ophir, or the Korori, and this is the land of Zuz. So what do we have? We know that Jophir knew of Ophir because one of his friends comes to him and kind of condemns him, thinking, Job, the reason you've had all these problems is because you're wicked, right? You're a bad guy, and the Lord's cursing you. If thou returns to the Almighty, Job's friend said, thou shalt be built up, thou shalt put away iniquity far from thy tabernacles. Then shalt thou lay up gold as dust, and the gold of Ophir as the stones of the brooks. So obviously Job knew that there was a river in Ophir that had stones in it. This is the only river in southern Oman, and this runs through down to Korori. So Job must have known about this area and must have known that Ophir had a river running through it. Does the Bible also support my theory that Nephi built his ship at Ophir? Because I'm saying they built it the same place Nephi built his ship. The Jaredites came before them and built their ships there. Well, what does the name Ophir mean? We have a lot of evidence that that is Ophir. Well, Nephi called his harbor bountiful because of its much fruit and wild honey. Smith's Bible Dictionary, and by the way, several other dictionaries that precede Smith's Dictionary, Ophir meant abundance. So you can go and just look that up on the internet. If you put a bountiful in the Microsoft Thesaurus, what do you get? Plentiful and abundant. Hitchcock's Bible Names Dictionary, Ophir means a fruitful region. So I find that very fascinating that you have probably a place name that's in the Book of Mormon that's actually, we have evidence that was it. So how many of the Jaredites Jaredites' 12 brothers left Ophir? Well, we're only told that Jared and his family left, their brother Jared and his family left, and 22 other friends. So all the rest of the brothers must have stayed in that area. How did the Jaredites build their ships? Well, they were light on the water like a bird or a fowl. So they're very light. They weren't heavy hulls. They were peaked at the ends. They were the length of a tree, these 8 barges, tight like a dish. Also, they were watertight like Noah's. They were sealed inside and out with pitch. They had a sail because they were driven by the wind and could be steered. So I'm assuming they had a sail here. Had openings at the top and the bottom to let air in. This is a replica of a ship that was found, an ancient ship that was found in Oman, and the ship is from Mesopotamia, and it's from the 3rd millennium BC. It's basically the length of a tree. It's pitched at both ends. Then this is the caption that's in the museum. The vessel comprised of reed bundles lashed together. So they broke this into 4 different layers, this model. The first one is reeds, they're lashed together tightly. So it's built out of reeds, so it's light on the water like a bird, with reed matting quilted into the reed belt hull. The vessel is then coated inside and out, so they have the matting here, with pitchum or tar. Okay, so remember, there's oil flows from the ground down there. So they had pitchum. So just like the Jaredite vessel, it was covered with the tar, like Noah's ship. Okay, and the outside was smeared with mud. So this whole outside of the ship was then coated with mud, the last layer here. Why would you coat a ship with mud? You take the mud and you coat it the ship. The salt in the mud, when it dries, makes the mud watertight, so it cannot let water in. So again, what's interesting is if you coat a ship with mud, what's it going to look like? It's going to look like an ancient dish, because ancient dishes were simply what? Earthenware dishes. So it would have the appearance of a great dish. This is a picture of a Mesopotamian river barge. They had, on top of the hull, they built cabins where the people would be. So I'm contending that this whole thing was covered with mud. How did the people here breathe? Well, they had to cut a hole in the top. And then how did the people down below, or the provisions down below, how did they breathe? They had to have a hole in the bottom, which is known in maritime lore as a hatch. They had a hatch. So Lord said, put a hatch here, put a hatch down here. Where did they go? Okay. I'm just bringing up old Michael Coe. You don't know about Michael Coe. It says there's no evidence of the Book of Mormon in Mesoamerica. But also, according to him, the first signs of the Olmecs is 1800 BC. The first Olmec city, which was a village where they found some remnants of corn, dates to 1500 BC. Well, that's 1,000 years of Jaredite history that's missing. When the Jaredites arrived in the New World, they were building cities, having wars. They were sophisticated people who came from Mesopotamia. Where were the Jaredites? Well, to look for the Jaredites, you got to look south. The Spanish chroniclers believed that Peru was Ophir. In fact, Columbus did as well. Fernando Montesino recorded the theory that Ophir sailed in the Americas and that Peru, the name Peru, was derived from Ophir. Native Peruvians told the Spanish that the first people to come to Peru were from Ophir. I don't know how they knew that, but that's what's found in the Spanish records. Jean Savoy, who's an amateur archaeologist who's discovered many cities out in the Amazon, claims to have discovered the icon of the land of Ophir on 3 stone tablets in Peru. Charles Mann, who wrote the book, which I recommend to everybody, is 1491, The Americas Before Columbus. He wrote, "Today we know that technologically sophisticated societies in the Americas rose first in Peru. The starting date, to archaeologists' surprise, keeps getting pushed back between 3,200 to 2,500 BC, when the people of Norte Chico, or Corral in Peru, were building these cities, and there was only one other urban complex on Earth at that time, which was Sumar, where the Jaredites had come from." So here you have Sumar in the old world, and you have Corral starting a little bit later in the new world. The only two civilizations that existed at that time. The ruins of Corral, or Norte Chico, have been carbon dated back to 2627 BC. Now you have a civilization that's comparable in a time frame to that of the Jaredites. Is there any evidence that the Jaredites actually came to Peru? Well, there's speculation here on my part, but look at this is the drawing of a Jaredite river barge. These are the boats you find on Lake Titicaca. If you remember, Thor Heyerdahl had to go to Bolivia to get people for the Ra to actually build a reed boat that could make it to the New World. Again, here you have the Jaredite vessels. Here you have the vessels on Lake Titicaca. You have gold plates and advanced metallurgical having existed in the Jaredites, but you also in Peru that found gold plates that date back to 1900 BC. There's nothing comparable in the New World outside north of Panama that dates metalwork to the times of the Book of Mormon. The Peruvans were the first people to actually believe in a white God or fair-skinned God. They also believed in the creation and of the flood. They had horses. The Jaredites had horses and they had elephants. Well, when the Spanish got to Peru, they called the llamas, they called them sheep, and the Incas called the horses of the Spanish llamas. You also had, at that time of the Book of Mormon, any animal that had a tusk was referred to as an elephant. And that's from the Greek. The Jaredites had a sophisticated government. This is the central site in Norte Chico or Corral. This is the chief administrative building and places where they did their ceremonies. The Jaredites had cotton and they had sophisticated fabrics. This is an example here of the cloths. The Peruvans were the amazing weavers of the ancient world. They were the best known. This is a drawing of a ziggurat from Mesopotamia, and here we have the ziggurats or a pyramid of quite similar shape in Corral. We also had in Corral, you had fishing nets, advanced irrigation systems, trade caravans, advanced architecture based on mathematics, and you had a division of labor, all common elements in Mesopotamia that are found in the New World. Now, as a final question, and it's brought up very plainly in Charles Mann's book, 1491. He says there's a dilemma in archaeology, and the dilemma is this. Archaeologists, anthropologists believe that Homo sapiens have been around for 1.3 million years. You know, our closest relative, they say. For 1.3 million years, nothing happened. They are hunter-gatherers. For all that time, they had no advanced technology whatsoever. And then within 200 years in Sumar, which would be the time that Noah arrives, all of a sudden they have written language, they have mathematics, architecture, metalwork, government, irrigation, textiles, sailing ships, fishing, complex theologies, goes on and on a list. Homo sapiens became incredibly smart very, very quickly. Of course, they discount the fact that Noah landed there. Okay, so that's a dilemma. How could they sleep for over 1 million years and then all of a sudden they become extremely genius? But the real paradox is that happened in Sumar. And then 200 years later, it happens halfway around the world in Peru. What's the explanation for that? Well, we know Noah arrives in Mesopotamia, 4th millennium BC, introduces advanced technologies, the priesthood and civilization as taught by Christ and by the Father in the garden. The Tower of Babel was built around 2500 BC. The Jaredites sailed to Peru and introduced the same technologies circa 2700 BC. Finally, the Lord promised the brother of Jared that there shall be none greater than the nation which I will rise up unto me of thy seed upon all the face of the earth. This is the city of Caral, the pyramids and ziggurats of Caral in Peru. But there are 25 other cities found in the same area of 20-mile zone. The Caral, or Norte Chico in Peru, was actually bigger than Sumar. At its time, it was the largest civilization, the greatest nation on earth. Thank you again. My films are available on the Nephi Project's website, as well as my books and so forth. Anyway, thank you very much. You can pick up my newsletter, nephiproject.com. We have a free newsletter that goes out every month. So if I could get out of, how do we get back to stop share? There it is. Okay. Now I can answer your questions. I'm sure, like I said, this is a lot of questions and some possible answers.
Okay, thank you, George. Paul, are you still on?
I commonly claim that first privilege. Yes, I'm trying to speak. Is that, am I not?
Yep. Well, now you're muted. There you
All right.
go.
Try again. All right. Thank you, George. First of all, let me express my condolences for the loss of a child. That is one of those dreadful things that we have to go through sometimes in life, and it's tough to send them off to their whatever the next service is that they are to perform for the Lord.
Well, it just doesn't seem right, but that's life, I guess. It's part of our challenges.
It is a tough thing, and we all end up going through that a little bit, and or sometimes a whole lot.
Yeah.
And
thank you.
And it's tough, and so we certainly can share the emotional struggle you've been through with that, and for you to come in spite of that is a blessing for us. And thank you for your presentation.
Well, I enjoy this group. You have great questions, and I enjoy making presentations.
Well, thank you, and I hope that continues this evening. I'm intrigued by your commentaries about the linguistics, because we've had the linguist Brian Stubbs on, who shows that there's a connection between the Semitic languages and the Uto-Aztecans. And I'm not quite sure what he will say about the possibility of the Uto-Aztecans reaching Peru, but perhaps he's on, he'll have a chance to respond. But the fact that he's been able to trace the linguistic cognates back through their fascicular origins to see that here's several hundred of the Semitic base words that show up in Mesoamerica and up into California, and then a bunch of them spread on across the United States. And so here's the possible linguistic tie or set of ties to help us trace some of the Book of Mormon history. And so for you to come up with this commentary about Moriancumer is a very intriguing factor, as is the comments about Jared and his brother. And so I just wanted to highlight that your research and his appear to have some consistencies that are remarkable. And so I compliment you for that. And I'll yield my question to the other people that are on. And I'll, because I'm not able to watch and monitor things, I'll yield to Deb to continue to do that fine job for us. Okay. But thank you, George. I very much appreciate your presentation.
Thanks, Paul. We have Monty and then Frank. Go ahead, Monty.
George, as Paul said, first off, our hearts are with you this evening. one of the things that I've thought about as I was reading the Book of Ether, I am no historian, but I was under the impression that when they first moved to the New World, they were still living in the Bronze Age. And yet in the Book of Ether, it talks about them building implements of steel.
Mhm.
And I was wondering about that.
Okay. In the book, in fact, there's a great discussion of steel and what Nephi had to have acquired to make steel swords. And the Jaredites would have had to have done the same thing. They had to have known that technology. You just don't one day stop being a hunter-gatherer or a farmer and say, I'm now going to make steel swords. That's a technological leap that's just too great. So if you read my article on the Interpreter Foundation, this Friday, they're going to publish in the Interpreter Foundation, their journal, a 25-page article by me about Korori. And it talks a lot about what's required to make a steel sword anciently. It's very, very complex. And the Peruvians were super in their advanced metallurgical skills. They were doing alloys back 1700 BC. And we still don't know how they did all their alloys, but they were amazing people. So there had to have been some kind of a culture. And I believe that whole knowledge came from Noah. You know, we know that the Lord was, Adam was in the garden with the Lord, the Heavenly Father, for 70 years or so, according to Joseph Smith. And then he would have taught Adam all sorts of skills on how to survive in that, celestial world where we live in, whatever. And then, of course, we know that Enoch, all of his days he walked with the Lord and learning again skills besides just the priesthood powers. So then all that information was transferred from Missouri, okay, with the flood over to Mesopotamia with Noah. Then all of a sudden the civilization just blooms there, okay? And so from there then, all of a sudden you have metallurgical work 2700 BC taking place in Corral, where they had gold and they had copper. Okay, so I don't think they were working bronze there, unless they called some kind of a copper alloy bronze over there. I don't right offhand. I know I've studied it some years ago, but I don't remember what exactly it was that they had there. But they had all sorts of copper and brass, and they had gold. And they had gold plates, which is an essential element of the Jaredite record. So we don't know if actually Ether actually made the gold plates, but they had them. We know they had gold.
Frank, you're next, please.
First of all, I want to apologize for coming in late. I've been tied up a lot these last few weeks. I saw the last part of your class here, and I appreciate what you've done. I've seen some of your other materials and really am impressed with a lot of your research. And my condolences to you. I didn't hear the details. Did you lose a son or a daughter?
I lost a daughter last week, yes.
I'm sorry.
Just daughter, yeah.
We've lost a daughter too, and it's hard to do. Was she young or adult?
No, she was 27, just completed medical school and was doing her internship.
Oh my.
And had heart failure, yeah. She just worked herself to death, kind of girl.
Yeah.
Always giving, yeah.
Ours was 42. Anyway, my major question is, you all believe that the Hill Cumorah is in New York, and that's I'm a limited to Tehuantepec person.
Okay.
And the Jaredites were in the land northward, and you're putting them far beyond any land southward that I can see that could be connected with Book of Mormon lands. I don't understand, unless you have already explained this, and if you have, my apologies for the whole group. But it's very clear in the Book of Mormon that the Nephites were living in land south of the land southward for much of their time. And then they lived in the land north of the land southward. And then they migrated into the land northward and got bottlenecked off in the land northward, north of the narrow neck of land in 350 AD. And when they ceded the entire land southward to the Lamanites, but the Jaredites were from the land northward, and you're putting them now in Peru. Do you see the land southward in Chile, or where do you see it?
Okay, if you read my book, actually, I think it's covered in the Jaredite book as well.
Okay.
In my book, Nephi and the Promised Land, I give you a paradigm for Peru. Now, there was no such thing as the Inca Empire. Okay, the Inca was the king. Okay, but
Sure.
the empire was called Tahuantinsuyo, which was the land of four quarters. We know the Book of Mormon lands were divided into four quarters. The center place of the whole Peruvian empire, Tahuantinsuyo, was Cusco, Peru. From there, there was a land northeast, a land northwest, there's a land southeast, and a land southwest. So the Jaredite land, Corral, would actually be, if it was in Peru, it would be in the northwest corridor or quarter of the land. Okay, so I give a complete detail of my model in Nephi and the Promised Land, where the narrow neck of land was in the whole schmear. It's my theory, okay? I know it might be called non-traditional by a lot of scholars, okay, like yourself, but it makes sense to me. Okay.
Well, it was the Nephites that called those lands northward, southward, north, and south.
Yes.
Mainly Mormon that used those names. In fact, for 400 years, Nephites didn't know where they were living. They just lived on the west coast of somewhere. And then they found the Mulekites that was straight north of them. They went down into the land northward, the land north, excuse me. And then it was Mormon that named the southern part the land south, but they called that the land of Nephi, and the land north was where Mulek came in. So anyway, I guess I'll have to get your book and read it, but that it doesn't fit with anything that I've ever studied, and I've been all over South America, Central America, and North America, and as well as Mexico. So,
well, if you've been to Peru, then you'll be able to follow the book. Okay, if you've been time in Peru. Okay, so it is, to tell you the truth, you know, a lot of the people at BYU, the scholars there, where they call themselves scholars, you know, they say, well, you have to have the internal logic of the Book of Mormon. You have to first identify where the lands would have been in some kind of internal model. And I challenge them all the time, saying, you show me one specific point that you can show me existed in the Book of Mormon and you can identify today. You can't. And I've seen maybe 12 different models for the land northward, the land of Zarahemla, the land of Nephi. I've seen them in California. I've seen them in, of course, Great Lakes. I've seen them in New England area. I've seen them in North Carolina. There's a friend of mine who does it in Colombia. So I think that there are many consistent models you can make using the very vague directions in the Book of Mormon. But I think that the Peru model is very consistent. Okay. Now, if you say Hill Cumorah is in New York, well, that is an intriguing point. How did the plates get there? I don't believe it was in New York, okay? But that's, again, my model.
Well, I don't believe it was either.
Okay.
I know the LDS Church believes that because they own the hill where Joseph found the plates.
Well, I don't think they believe anything. I mean, the church's official policy is they don't talk about geography in the Book of Mormon because everybody's arguing.
Well, yeah, but they did until just last, I guess just before the COVID thing came out, they stopped doing their Cumorah festival up there.
Yeah, I
But
understand.
that was an official thing from the church itself, and they've traditionally taught that. I had an interesting conversation with an ex-LDS in Chile,
Mhm.
and I asked him, where do you think the Book of Mormon lands were? And he thought for a second, and he said something that was very, very strange to me. And
Okay.
then when he explained it, I immediately understood. He said, well, nobody ever gets lost in Chile. Well,
Okay.
okay, what do you mean by that? And he says, well, they sent out a search party and they got lost. And in Chile, he says the livable land is only about 50 miles wide. And then you've got mountains on the west, on the east, and ocean on the west. So if you were lost and you were in a forest, and there's not very many of them down there, if it was in Peru, there wouldn't have been any forest there because the land has been a total absolute desert with probably less than a foot of rain in the last 2,000 years. Along the coast there, it's just a barren desert. He said if you could find a tree, you could climb it if you're lost in a forest, and you'd look to the east, you could see the mountains, and to the west you could see the ocean, because the livable strip there is only about 50 miles wide. So it didn't take me long to figure out what he was talking about, because a couple of search parties got lost trying to find their way between the land south and the land north in the land southward. So anyway, that was an interesting conversation with him. And he did say, well, I believe that the Book of Mormon lands must be someplace in Mesoamerica. He didn't use that term, but he said Central America and Mexico.
Well, if you find one bit of archaeological evidence that dates back to the Book of Mormon in Mesoamerica, please notify me, okay?
Well, there is one thing that you need to understand, and that is that the entire west coast of Mexico is still nearly totally unexplored, because until about 20 to 30 years ago, the Balsas River Valley has always been forbidden, and archaeologists would try to go up the river and they'd be found floating down the river. Very few people have been up to explore the western coast of Mexico, all the way from Acapulco way up to the north, simply because the Native Americans there didn't welcome strangers.
Hey,
And so there's a lot of,
we used to spend our spring breaks down on the western coast of Mexico having a good time when I was in college. So
well, you were on the coast.
maybe I wasn't looking for archaeological evidence.
No. Yeah,
But,
you're down on the beach down there.
That's right. I was on the beach.
Right.
But,
The ruins would have been up in the mountains and to the
Again-
west, to the east, excuse me.
Again, to this point, there's been no archaeological evidence. Just Michael Coe, there's been thousands and thousands of excavations in Mesoamerica. There's just no evidence. There's no gold, there's no copper, there's no silver. It dates back. There's no animals that make any sense to the Book of Mormon context that lived in those times. So I don't know. I mean, mine is just a theory. Read my book, okay, and see, because I believe that the only civilizations that were Nephite-like that were in the Americas, you have to go down to South America. I haven't found anything north of it. There's no domesticated animals. There's no metallurgical work. The tradition of the white God doesn't even date back to Book of Mormon times. And, if you think a serpent God is Jesus Christ.
Now
I've
been studying the serpent god. You're talking about Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, Gukumats. They do date back that far. I've got a lot of research on that. I lived in Mexico for 16 years and have traveled all over it for all my life, basically since 1965. And that I know that, and I studied in the university down there 2 years. The Quetzalcoatl legend, it goes back to the time of Christ.
America until 800 AD. Okay, and that's archaeology, that's anthropology, that's not pseudo stuff. Now, again, I don't want to argue with anybody because we don't know where the Book of Mormon took place. I'm the first one to say that. We have theories, we have ideas, and as long as we disagree, we have fun. It's going to be very disappointing when the Lord says it took place in Western Mexico. We're not going to have fun speculating anymore. But please keep yourself open to South America. And I love Mexico. And I love the people down there. I used to go, when I was going to school at UC San Diego, I always go to Tijuana because I thought the Mexicans had a lot more spiritual beings than we had. You know, they're just more spiritual people. And indeed, I believe that the Lamanite DNA is found throughout the Americas. The people, we know their old trade routes, ancient trade routes that went all through the Americas. And so the people knew each other, they were missionaries, and who knows where it took place. But
I do believe that that there were Israelites who went from the old world to South America, as well as Central America and North America, and probably other places. There's at least 4 places that are mentioned in the 3rd chapter of Jacob,
yeah,
where the Lord says that he planted portions of the house of Israel. And so, you know, I'm not adverse to that. And I believe that the bearded God that came over here visited all those places.
I do too.
I don't think that he just went to one place.
I agree.
We have the record of 3 days and then a few other visits after that. But I believe he ministered over here for about 3.5 years, visiting hundreds and hundreds of villages and cities and groups of people. So yeah, I don't have any problem with that.
Yeah, and you go
Viracocha.
when I was young, I used to study the Hopis, you know, and it's like, whoa, definitely the white God was there.
Sure.
You know, they knew him personally. So that's an interesting idea. I've never thought about that. A long 3 year. I thought maybe it was here for a few months but 3 years. Yeah.
Look at the 9th chapter of Daniel. It talks about the 70 years, and the last year, 70 weeks of years, basically, is 490. And that last year that's mentioned in the last verse, I think it's verse 27, it says it was divided up into 2 parts. And the Messiah, now the Protestants will say that was the Antichrist. I don't believe that at all. It was the Messiah that came and he stopped the sacrifice. He spoke from heaven right after he was crucified to the people here and said, "You shall no longer offer any blood sacrifices to me. You shall offer up a broken heart and a contrite spirit." So that was the middle point. Then he began his ministry over here. He told the people over there, you know, I have other sheep that I've got to visit. And then when he got here, he says, there's other sheep that are not around here and not from Jerusalem, and I've got to go to visit them too. So,
That's
you know,
an interesting point.
he had a big job there.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. The Incas, when the Spanish got there, you know, they referred to the alpaca as their sheep, and the Incas were sacrificing their unblemished sheep
Cool.
to the gods. But back to your point, why would they have done that if Jesus Christ had come there and told them not to do blood sacrifices?
Well, the religion always gets corrupted. There's a guy here in Independence that I heard was going to start sacrificing animals again. So, you know, they're Judaizers basically when they start doing that. And they forget the reason why Christ came. They had gone into apostasy. I mean, they were sacrificing humans when Cortez got to Mexico.
In Peru.
So, you know,
the Incas were sacrificing their virgins.
Yeah.
Well,
nice talking with you.
In every place. Thank you, Frank. Good talk to you again.
George, God bless you.
Yeah.
Okay, Roger, go ahead, please.
Yeah, George, I'm a big fan of your work. I appreciated your Nephite presentation so much that I had to have that video. All the excellent work you've done in Saudi Arabia is just commendable. So
Well,
I
thank you.
appreciate that. I wanted to ask you about that reed vessel, and if you've done any more work on that to see how ocean worthy that might have been.
Okay. There's a guy named Volsmer who's doing work. What's his name? Volsmer is his last name, Vosmer. And he is studying ancient Omani ships. And he built a replica just about 6 months ago of a reed ship and was going to sail it from Oman over to India, White India, down in the middle of India. And I think he made a mistake, and he used heavy goat skin fabrics, like the old tents, as the sails. And I can tell you this, his boat got about 8 hours out into the sea and sank. So, and he's a well-known archaeologist, maritime archaeologist. So, you know, if you looked at Voyages of the Book of Mormon, Frank Linehan and Comrade Dixon, they want to build a replica Nephi ship and sail it. And I said, I'll do that as long as there's a modern yacht right next to it. But they're experienced sailors. Both of them sailed more than 1 million miles. The reed ships are not seaworthy as far as I can tell. The Ra, you know, the first Ra from Thor Heyerdahl, Ra 1, it fell apart before it got to South America. And then he made a mistake. He went to Egypt to get people to build his ship, because they had reed Torah ships in Egypt along the Nile River. And so then that ship fell apart. So then he went to Bolivia, Lake Titicaca, and got the Indians in Lake Titicaca to build Ra 2. And that one successfully made it. But they become, you know, over time, they tend to get waterlogged, and they tend to, you know, been tied together. They just very, very weak. So if you're going from, say, Korori in Oman across 2 oceans, you've got to make some, it can't be a reed ship. It's got to be something that's tighter. Again, those ocean-going Omani ships, ancient Mesopotamian ships, they had the reed ships, or the reed bundles tied together very tightly. Then they had a mat put over those. And then on that mat, both inside and outside, they put pitchum or tar. And then they put the mud all around it. And I don't know, it took the Jaredites a long time to get to the New World, 344 days. So in my opinion, they must have just hugged the shore all the way around Alaska and down wherever they ended up. And I imagine when their lights, they could have, you know, at night, I'm sure at night they came into the shore. They had to recock them from time to time, put more mud on. They probably took pitchum with them to hold them together. I don't know. The Lord had to have been with them. You know, it's they had to be pretty brave. You know, there were a lot of 13 sons of Yoktan, and only 2 of them got on those ships and took off. The rest of them said, sorry, you know, I'm not going to do that. So I have done no research on it outside of the Voyages book.
Okay, thank you.
First self I ever took, I took from the Space Needle and had our cruise ship.
There's some comments in the chat, George. Brian Stubbs has added some stuff.
Yeah.
David
The
Reed, thanks for
bases,
your presentation
yeah.
research. It was very interesting.
Okay.
Brian's thoughts kind of overlap with you, but not entirely coincidence.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah.
Don't coincide, sorry. He thinks that the Jaredites were in South America, Mesoamerica, and North America. They had 2,000 years to spread all over before Lehi came.
What? Yeah. One of the things I did is I looked at the ages in the Jaredite book, and this is really, I guess, you know, pulling for straws, or what you call it. But I looked at the ages of the Old Testament prophets and then the Jaredite kings, and I did a linear regression on that. I took it to a mathematician professor, and we tried to speculate what was the date of all the Jaredite kings, the approximate date based on how long they were living, and their lifespans were becoming shorter and shorter. And what I found interesting is that the time of Heth, when the Jaredites went south, they followed the wild animals. That would have been about, according to this regression analysis, it would have been around 1600 BC, which is the exact same time that the Altiplano was originally populated in Bolivia and Peru. And then about 100 years later, after that, you have the Jaredites who go north looking for food, and they're finding food. Well, that corresponds very well with the Omax in Mexico or in Central America. So we know that the Jaredites spread out. There were Jaredite migrations, and they tend to fall in place with the this mathematical progression of the dates of the kings. I found it interesting. So I do believe that the Jaredites are all over. I don't think all the Jaredites were killed off either. I think it was just those who were locally killed off. But the Jaredite bloodlines are all over the Americas. That's, again, just my idea, my theory.
I'd like to agree with you. I believe that there were Jaredites all over the New World. Probably some of them got into South America. I know that we would differ on where they started, but I believe they were in South America. I believe they went way into the land northward into North America and probably Canada. Probably the ones that mined a lot of the copper that was up in Michigan, and started the Bronze Age over in the Old World. I believe that they were going across the oceans during those times too.
You know, what's very interesting is that the metallurgical work, the earliest metallurgical work was found in North America, but it ended for some reason around 3000 BC. It just ended, it stopped. And archaeologists go, well, why did it stop? Well, Noah got on a boat and went to Mesopotamia. Everybody else was killed. Okay, then it was reintroduced by the Jaredites. So again, that's my theory. Let it be. Give some ground. It's a seed, let it grow on you. But yeah, I mean, you think about it, the Jaredite history is an ancient history. It was what, at least 2,000 years of history
I agree with that.
was recorded in the Book of Mormon. Well, 2,000 years, people spread all over the place in 2,000 years.
Exactly
But
right.
you look at the United States. When was it settled? Jamestown, you know, is that the earliest? So we're talking about 400 years is all. And look at the United States when it was originally settled by Europeans. So the Jaredites had 2,000 years. They're going all over the place.
Twice as long as the Nephites, yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Hey, Brian and then Rick. Go ahead, Brian.
Unmuted, I guess, am I?
You're
Hey, yes, I
unmuted.
agree with both of the last two who said that, yeah, the Jaredites were spread all over, had 2,000 years to spread all over. One point worth keeping in mind, and it's neither for nor against what you're saying. It just has to do with the people in Sumer. In the Joseph Smith translation of the Old Testament, in that verse where it says the people traveled from the east and came to the land of of Shinar, Sumer, same thing. That's what it says in the Hebrew text as well. However, Joseph Smith adds an interesting clarifying detail, and he said that some of them came from the east and settled in the land of Shinar. Now, that's interesting because that would suggest that not everybody was at Sumer. Not everybody was at the Tower of Babel. There were descendants of Noah in other places whose languages were not subject to whatever happened there. Who knows what happened there? But in other words, they're just natural descendants of the Noah language. And I'm just guessing that, for example, Indo-European might have been one of those that's just out and about and not subject to that. And in fact, there are a few linguists that have theorized that Nostratic involves a number of language families, and that might be it. However, who knows? But that's just a thought to keep in mind, is that not everybody was involved. Not all of Noah's descendants were involved at the Tower of Babel, which doesn't really change anything of our later thinkings, but it's just interesting.
I found it very fascinating, though, that Moroni says, look, the Jaredite record is found among the Jews. Okay, and I'm not going to write about it. And so then where is that? Well, the Jaredites are basically Genesis 10 and 11, and all the other descendants of Noah aren't in that group. So I do find it very fascinating. And thank you for that comment, Brian. I've never heard of that. I never thought about that, I should say. Probably heard about it, but just never sunk in my mind. Thank you very much for that information.
Okay, Rick, go ahead, please.
Okay, George, thanks for your presentation. I was really fascinated by the words that seem to match with that port along the southern edge of the empty quarter. And what the question I have is that he said that he was going to lead the Jaredites into a land where no man had ever been. So I take that to mean when they traveled, they didn't encounter anyone. And so when they got to those places and they named those places, did they leave people behind, or did they put up a signpost to say, hey, we named this place, I don't know what you called it. It was like a 2-syllable word. Yeah. And so in order for that name to carry on into our language today and into our maps today, wouldn't have one of those Jaredites or a group of Jaredites have stayed behind in those lands in order to establish the town and give it a name?
Yeah, let me just give you a side thing. Okay, I was living in Saudi Arabia, and I was doing my research on Lehi's Trail. And then I was reading the Book of Mormon one night, and it said they traveled in that corridor where no man had ever been. And that's exactly what the empty corridor is called. It's the empty corridor because no man has ever lived there. So that just was like a light going off, in my head, like, oh my gosh, is that a clue to where the Jaredites went? Because over there, it's just, you say the corridor where no man ever lived, and an Arab will say, oh yeah, I know where that is. And it's like saying here where the Rocky Mountains are. People know exactly in Arabia where the empty corridor is, that place where no man has ever dwelt. Now, as I said before, they're according to Reverend Foster, and he goes into detail and shows the different tribes, just like Ollie showed the 3 tribes there in the land that he's familiar with, there in the Slavic coastal plain. But Reverend Forrest, he goes through and shows all the different lands where all the different sons of Oktan had lived. So biblical Jared, according to my theory, biblical Jared came down with his 12 brothers to that land. And the only ones who actually got on the boats were a very small party. They only had 8 little barges. So you had the brother Jared, it says, and you had the Jared himself and his family, and yet 22 other people got on those barges. So all those other sons of Yoktan would have stayed there and dwelt there. And that's why I'm saying it's interesting that the Bronze Age in that area, according to archaeologists, started around 2500 BC. All the different advances in farming and agriculture and irrigation and metalwork date back to about that period. So yes, a lot of them would have stayed there, and they would have continued calling the place Ophir instead of Moriancumer. But we know that both Jared in the Bible and Jared in the Book of Mormon had a brother who had a harbor named after him. One was Ophir and one was Moriancumer. Were they the same people? I believe they were, but speculation on my part, of course.
Okay, thanks. That would explain how the places retain the names that you're using to follow the dots.
Yes, they would have stayed there. Mhm.
Yeah. Any information on Mount Zarin that was moved out of its place?
None whatsoever. No idea. Okay.
Okay. The Nephites, when they encountered the Jaredites, at least the search party that Limhi sent, they encountered breastplates and swords, and they said they were larger than the Nephites. Would that make them larger than us? Would that mean that those people, I mean, are there burials in Peru that would support a larger than Nephite size?
Well,
I mean, first we have to establish what is a Nephite size, because that would be our starting point.
okay. And Nephi was a big guy, apparently. Now, let's go back to the definition of the people of that land were Mera Kamar. The people of Mera were the people, that's what the people were known in that general area. They originated, if you read, I was running through that stuff very quickly. They say they originated from the people of Ad. And the people of Ad were known to have been giants, okay, big people. So that would mean that the Jaredites were large people, considering the people, I guess, who they lived next to. So we have that. I have seen one of my old companions was missionary companions was a guy named Glenn Kimball, who did the ancient scriptures, and he also did USO stuff, and he was kind of a nut. But anyway, he claimed that there were giants down there in the museums in Peru. I don't know of that. I do know that one day, this is not to be repeated, on one of our preparation days up by Lake Titicaca, we went out to a site which had ancient pre-Inca burial tombs. And they were these cone-shaped things, and they had a hole in them, and then you could kind of crawl down into them. And so we went down into these things, which was nutty, because how did we ever get out if we didn't have finger holes? And when we went down in the darkness, when we finally hit something solid, it cracked, and they were skulls and bones of dead people. And the size of the head were huge. And I didn't have my camera with me. And in fact, maybe I do. I had some old slides. Maybe I did.
Been there, done that.
But that's strange stuff. Okay, maybe as a conquistador, I don't know, but it was sure larger than the Incas around them. The people there, the Quechua and the Amaran people. So, but that's interesting. Another fascinating thing is that you'd have to go in and look at my map of South America and where the four quarters are, and the narrow neck of land and all that sort of stuff. But the Spanish, when they got there, they asked where should they build their capital, and the Incas told them go to the Rimac Valley, and the Rimac Valley is where Lima, Peru is located. And it is the ugliest place in the world. I mean, the weather is ugly, the city is ugly. It's just not something. I mean, I love the place and they have a great Argentinian steakhouse, but to tell you the truth, it's a horrible place. Remac Valley is it's always overcast, it's hot. And people say that was the Inca revenge to the Spanish. Build your capital in the Remac Valley. The Incas used to call the Remac Valley the land of the people of desolation. Okay, the land of the people of desolation. It wasn't because there's no vegetation there, which Frank was talking about. There is no vegetation there. It's a blooming desert, but they called it that because of the people of the land of desolation. I could send you that footnote in the booklet that's in. It's in my book, Nephi and the Promised Land. But
Okay,
by William Sullivan's the guy who wrote that book. It's called The Mysteries of the Incas.
I just recently watched a documentary on Corral, and
Yes.
I didn't know it existed, and it was really fascinating. I don't know if you've seen that. I can't even know if it's like on YouTube, probably.
I've probably seen it because I've looked at a lot of YouTubes on Corral. Yeah, I've been there
Yeah,
myself.
it was the one where they found a lot of cotton remnants and fish bones,
Mhm.
and they what was it?
Yeah, Jaredites have cotton, yes.
The thought just left me. But they said it was one of the, if not the oldest city in the Americas.
So
But,
far.
oh, yeah, I know what it was. They employed a technique where they tied rocks together in bundles to build that structure that you showed with the circle out front
Yeah.
on your presentation.
Oh, mathematics. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, the terracing,
Yeah.
the terracing in that pyramid was held together with
Cotton.
like netting
Huh.
made out of plant fibers.
That's interesting because it's all mud. Yeah.
And they said it suffered an earthquake and they rebuilt it, but they said it eventually led its demise because of climate change.
Oh, okay.
Um,
But yeah. See what they say how the explanation that anthropologists give for Corral is that they learned to fish, okay? And they would take the cotton nets and go out and fish in their balsa boats. And that, because it's the Humboldt Current, you have all these sardines that grow there, and it's very rich in protein. And because they're eating protein, they became very smart, and they invented all these things like metallurgical work. Like, right, they can explain how, but they can't explain why it happened. It's a very poor explanation, but a fascinating civilization, which
Yeah.
And they're just learning more about it. But the thing is that, you know, was it, they probably explained it in the video. It's been about 25 years now that Corral was discovered, and they thought it was just a bunch of sand dunes. And the Harvard team was down there, husband and wife team were down there. I forget their names right at the bat, but they were down there. And they just thought they were sand dunes. And then this Peruvian lady, Solis, she's the one that said, well, that's kind of unusual to have that kind of formed sand dunes. Let's dig them out. And they turned out to be pyramids. But then they found out that there's 25 other cities in that whole metropolitan area, and it was bigger than Sumer. It was really a huge civilization at that time. There are also, you know, that whole northern coast of Peru, they're finding amazing, they continue to uncover amazing things like the Temple of the Sun in Trujillo, where I was a missionary. That thing's vast, you know, it's huge. I mean, it makes the pyramids in Egypt look like nothing. You know?
Well, it's certainly interesting that they've discovered this city, and it dates back to a time, you know, and align with, you know, the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
But in order for, and you probably have this in your book, but in order for, you know, for if the Jaredites landed there, the Mulekites weren't too far, and the Nephites weren't too far either. But if the Jaredites had migrated and then we have the Mulekites and the Nephites somewhere else than Corral, then that might explain, you know, their landings. Either their landings are pretty close to the same area, or they're different. You know, Nephi brought seeds and things to grow from the area of Jerusalem, so they had to have a similar climate wherever they landed in order for those seeds and plants to survive.
Yeah.
So I don't know right offhand where this place in Peru is and what the climate is, whether it would support the plants that grew that they brought from Jerusalem.
There's a guy who wrote some books, Nephi on the Isles or something like that. His name is Arthur Cokerhance, and he served a mission in Central America. And he concluded that the Book of Mormon took place in Peru because of the climate.
Oh, okay.
Seeds that would grow there, you need a Mediterranean climate, so you have that shoreline of South America, the Pacific shoreline, you have Baja California, you have Southern California, and those are the only places where those seeds would have grown. That's his theory, okay?
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if anybody's tested that, of course, but that was his theory. And I go with the contention that the Jaredites must have landed near Corral because it dates very back to, you know, to that area, dates right back to the Jaredite times. I go with Joseph Smith's supposed teaching that the Nephites landed in, was it 30 degrees south in Chile, and then they migrate up into the Andes. And the Mulekites must have been somewhere in between. You know, they must have landed somewhere. Because the Mulekites, I think it talks about two different landings in the Mulekites. They landed one place and they went someplace else, if I recall. That's all in the voyages of the Book of Mormon, their landing sites and all that. And
Well,
we knew that they did
yeah.
journeyings in the, you know, in the Nephi talks about they did journeyings in the wilderness before they came to the place where they built the city of Nephi. Jacob talks about being on an isle of the sea. So my contention is 4 brothers came, you know, the Inca tradition of the 4 white brothers, big guys, who landed in Peru from the sea. They say they landed in Chile. Then they went to the Isle of the Sun in Lake Titicaca. They were there. The oldest son was a jerk and violent guy who caused troubles everywhere they went. So they had to leave, and they went north looking for fertile land. They met the Tambo Indians who showed them the Cusco Valley. Mau Capac, the 4th of those brothers, made 2 sets of gold plates, put one on his chest, one on his back, stood before the Cusco Valley. And when the sun hit, the people realized from the golden plates, that was going to be their king. So it's fascinating, the oral traditions of the Incas and how they correlate pretty well to the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, there was something about a golden raft that they found. I don't know, within this story that I read on Corral. Yeah,
Golden
but
raft.
I don't want to take much more of your time, but your statement was a little humorous about, you know, there must be 25 different Book of Mormon land theories.
I've seen a lot of them, yeah.
Yeah.
Including some pretty ridiculous ones, like, you know, the one, what was that?
Africa,
Who knows? Well,
the old world.
No, I read it when I was a missionary. I thought, this is just nonsense.
There is one of them over in Africa.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, in fact, there's one that they went down the east coast of Africa. I was like, well, they were traveling southeast, it'd be in the water, you know. But remember Olivia Phillips? She wrote the book Isle of the Sea or something like that. And she contended that, you know, the Andes Mountains weren't there, and that the Amazon was a Great Lake. And, you know, it's just, from a geologist standpoint, it's just sheer nonsense. I mean, my dad was a geologist. I believe my dad, okay, before some of these kind of crazy theories about what happened in the earth. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thanks for your time and your presentation. I'm very sorry about the loss of your daughter.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah. Mhm. And great comments, Rick. Yeah.
Frank, go ahead.
I was interested in George's comment about dropping down into a tomb. Paul, do you remember crawling back into that tomb down at Palenque?
You guys are as naughty
We
as
did
I
that
am.
in 1967, 68, excuse me. And I was the only one with a camera that went back in there, and we didn't have flashlights either. We went back later with a flashlight, and there was these huge spiders on all over the
Oh.
top of this thing.
And that's not for me. Yeah.
No, and I did get a picture of some of them, but it was I had a flash on my camera, and back then you had bulbs. They didn't have electronic flashes or anything, so I took the bulb out, put it in, and flashed it. And Paul says, "Did you see anything?" It was just pure white. Couldn't see a thing. You know, it's just instantaneous, so you don't get to see anything.
I scared the spiders for sure.
I'm sure, but we went back later with a little flashlight and looked around, and that's when we saw the spiders.
Yeah.
Talking about the stature of the Nephites compared to the Jaredites, the Jaredites were larger in stature than the Nephites, apparently. Having lived among the Zapotec Indians for many, many years, they're very short people. And I believe they were probably related to the Nephites or the Mulekites in that area. But I met a family of these people that were living up in Mexico City when I was visiting up there. And I took a picture, and I've still got it. The husband and the wife came under my arms if I would stretch my arms out like this.
Okay.
And I got that photograph. So the Zapotec Indians and the Maya both were very short compared to the Europeans. Now there was a lot of Europeans that mixed in with the people around Mexico City with Cortez and them. And probably if there were Jaredites up there, they would have been. By the way, I don't think that the Jaredites all got killed off in their last battle either. I don't know how you feel about that, George.
No, I agree. Nephites the same way.
That's exactly. Well, there's promises about the Nephites by Lehi himself. He says, Joseph, your descendants are not all going to be destroyed.
Yeah.
They got mixed in with the Lamanites, but his bloodline is still there. And the Jaredites, they had 2,000 years to disappear everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, the people don't hang around. You know, I lived in Switzerland. It was so funny because when I was living there was Lower Appenzell and Upper Appenzell. And it's one valley, it goes up into the Alps. And about 1940, somewhere in there, the Protestants were in the Upper Appenzell and the Catholics were in the Lower Appenzell, and they were intermarrying the kids. And it made them so upset, they decided that had to stop, and that the people who were Protestants had to all move up to Upper Appenzell, and all the Catholics had to move down to Lower Appenzell. And guess what? 20 years later, the same thing. The
Hatfields and the
Catholics are marrying
McCoys.
the Protestants are marrying the Catholics, and they just gave up, you know.
Yeah, well,
And that's what happens in these civilizations. There's
right.
a good book called In the Blood. Who wrote In the Blood? It was well, anyways, it's an English geneticist, and he talks about the spread of genes, and he talks about the Jews from Spain and how they migrated to Turkey, and then years later they find out that the Turkish Jews don't have any or very, very little Jewish DNA in them. They all intermarried, even though they had Jewish laws. Same with the Jews in Yemen.
Right.
And he says that, you know, people just spread, and you give it time. We're only talking about a couple hundred years, maybe 500 years. Think about the Jaredites. They're all over the place in 2000.
That's right.
Intermarrying with any native tribes they came up across. So, you know, I have all sorts of weird thoughts, like Moroni. He had to get out of Dodge because he was probably the crown prince or something near it, because of the fact that Mormon was made the head of the army at age 15. He must have been the crown prince, because who would follow a 15-year-old into battle unless he is a royal? And Moroni, he talks about the fact that they're pure Nephites. So they were in trouble. You know, the Lamanites certainly wanted to get Mormon. They wanted to get Moroni. He had to take off. Well, okay, he's probably a pretty young guy. He's got his whole life to live. Do you think he wandered around nowhere for 40, 50 years? My feeling is he went and got married. He found a nice Jaredite girl, you know, and got married somewhere up in New York. Who knows? You know, we got to kind of keep our minds open to the realities of how people behave. That's my theory. Don't tell anybody about it, but it's
Okay.
what I think.
Your reference to the land of desolation doesn't really fit in my understanding of Peru, because the nations that lived in Peru were up in the mountains to the east, and down in the valley there where Lima is right on the coast on the west. And the Book of Mormon says that the land of desolation was in the north. And I heard you say that you have a different compass for the Book of Mormon, so I guess you may have figured that out.
The base of Tehuantinsuyo was Cusco. Lima is northwest of Cusco. Okay, and let me give you the Secrets of the Incas, a book called The Secrets of the Incas by William Sullivan. He's the one that quotes the Incas called the Rimac Valley the land of the people of desolation. Okay, which is I find very fascinating, because William Sullivan is, you know, an anthropologist. He's not an LDS or RLDS or anything else to do with the RLDS. But it's amazing that that was what they used to call it.
One thing I wasn't clear about, I didn't figure out where you had the crossings. Did you have all of these, the Mulekites, the Jaredites, and the Nephites all going across the Pacific Ocean? Because that's the only thing that's in Peru.
No, I don't.
How did they climb over the Andes then to get over there, or what?
No. Okay, let's go one at a time, okay?
Okay.
The Jaredites, you know, I have fun with the guys up at BYU, because most of them are armchair archaeologists. And I remember I gave a presentation at BYU to the faculty of BYU, including all the farms guys. And they would kind of listen to me like, oh, who's this guy, you know? And then I put a film on of Frank Linehan, Captain Linehan, who's a Navy hull expert. He was a competitive sailor. He sails from like LA, San Francisco to Hawaii on these competitions. People hire him to captain their ships, okay? He sailed over 1 million miles at sea. He's been in hurricanes, okay? And he's also, of course, a graduate of the Maritime Academy. He's a maritime historian. He's just a man of the sea. And he's, by the way, he's LDS, you know, he's got a beard, he's got scars from who knows what. He looks like a real old salt. And the minute he started talking, they realized they know nothing about voyages or crossing an ocean in any kind of a boat. I mean, they were just stunned. In fact, when I got done with the 10-minute film of him, they said, is that guy a Mormon? Well, they're not all the same, you know, some of them take a little different tracks. But so Frank was really helpful. And in fact, well, I won't go into all the other stuff that relate to this, but he is of the contention that Nephi could not have sailed around Cape Horn. It's just too dangerous and just too difficult for an amateur sailor to do that. He'd have to go across the Pacific. The other thing he noted was that the ocean is a desert. If you don't get across the ocean quickly, you starve to death. So you have to go at least to the roaring 40s to get enough wind to get you across the Pacific Ocean. So then once you get across the Pacific Ocean, then, okay, you could sail up and down the coast. You could land in Mesoamerica, you could land in Peru, whatever, but you got to take the Pacific. You can't go around the Horn. So if they built their ships at Korori, Bountiful, then they had to go the Pacific route. The Mulekites, though, are a different story. And the Jaredites would have been the same thing. The Jaredites, we believe, went that way, but they had to stay around the shoreline. That's why it took them so long to make the entire journey, is they sailed with the shoreline always in sight.
So you've got the Jaredites and the Nephites coming across the
That's
Pacific,
The Mulekites are a different story. The Mulekites probably went with
across the Atlantic.
Phoenicians- with the Phoenicians, yeah.
Yeah,
Because
I
they've done lots
agree
of
with
Phoenician names.
I agree with all your directions.
Probably
I
went to
just-
Argentina or someplace and went up the Platte River, across the Andes. But
Or the
Hard to know.
Umacinta River, maybe.
maybe, yeah, okay, maybe. whatever. Again, we don't know for sure. All the fun will be gone once the Lord tells us, oh, darn.
Well, sure.
You know, I got people here in my area. I give presentations and they got all sorts of ideas. So, you know, they took spaceships or aliens. So it's fun. You know, I've enjoyed this very much. This whole thing started because I was over in Arabia and we wanted, a group of LDS had read a book by Bob Waterman, who had played football at BYU, who is not a Mormon. We wrote this book about Mount Sinai. And so.
Was he a Christian?
Yes, yes.
Okay, well, at
He
least
wrote
he was
this
a
book,
Christian.
And it was very, very, very poorly written.
Oh, okay.
Full of a bunch of hyperbole that no one could believe, you know, being chased by the military in Saudi Arabia. He claimed he snuck into Arabia and he found this mountain, and it's Mount Sinai. And here's artifacts that relate to it. And so when I got there, 4 groups of the LDS had been out looking for it. And a whole bunch of other groups from Aramco had got this book, and they're out going to look for the real Mount Sinai. Now there's all sorts of YouTube videos about the real Mount Sinai in Arabia. You've probably seen them. So they wanted me to go out with them because I had a 4-wheel drive and they'd been out 4 times before. And so I said, okay. So I went with 2 guys. We went out there. We didn't go more than a half mile past where the 4th group had turned around because it got dark. And there we found the mountain with the artifacts. And it was just a miracle we found it because their instructions were so poor that were in this book. So what do you do when you find Mount Sinai? So it looks like
Camp
Mount
out.
Well, you gotta
That's
go
what
down
Moses
to
did.
Midian. You gotta go down to old Midian, right? And you gotta look at the wells of Jethro, and then that led us to the waters of Moses. And that is probably what's the Valley of Lemuel today. It's what we believe is the Valley of Lemuel.
That's all really cool stuff, George. I loved your presentation on that. That was great.
So, but you know, it's like, what do you do? You know, I came back to Utah and I went to the Ensign magazine. And they said, oh my goodness, if you're over there, go find the rest of it. And I'm going, what? Yeah, you live there. Go find the rest of it. So then, okay. So a group of us went out and spent 5 years looking for Lehi's Trail. And then, you know, all of a sudden you read, oh, I'm out in the empty quarter. I go out there just because it's such a beautiful place. And one thing leads to another, and 4 books later, you're still inquiring. So it's been a very fascinating and fun activity for me. And I hope it's given people alternative views of the Book of Mormon, where it might have taken place.
I hope that's not alternative.
I'm hoping,
That was the real route, I think.
yeah. Oh, no, that's pretty much it. Yeah, I agree. That's the only place there's water. They had to have taken the frankincense trail. It leads right to Korori. But, you know, I think, okay, I'm retired now. I'm back in the US. You know, Saudi Arabia's opened up to tourism. I could go back there now, and I don't know. It's like, it's got to come to an end sooner or later. And let the younger generation pick it up, you know, these ideas. Because we still don't, you know, I've never seen, I swore that when I left the Valley of Lemuel, I was going to write. In fact, it's just a beautiful place. It's just like, it'd be a national park in the US. I was there with my Saudi friend, my Muslim friend, and someone had spray painted on the canyon wall. I thought, who would do that? It's such a beautiful place. It makes Petra
Yeah.
look like nothing. And I was angry. I said, why did some idiot do that? And he says,
Until you read it and it said Lehi was here.
no, it
Spray
said,
paint.
it said, look what Allah has created.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, yeah, I felt so humble.
Okay.
With this Arab, this Muslim friend of mine. But I swore I was going to put a sign up there, Lehigh State Park.
There you go.
So many LDS go up there camping now who live there. It's like a favorite campground. It's really beautiful. Anyway, any other questions?
Nancy, did you have a question? No?
No,
Okay.
I really need to call my wife. She's, working on the.
I have one.
Daughter. Yeah, go ahead. The last question,
Yeah.
please.
Who has the
Okay,
question?
well,
Who's talking? It sounds like
Paul disappeared.
Yeah,
That was Paul.
where's Paul at? I think we need to check on
Well,
him.
he
got
was
bad
here.
internet.
He just got dropped off.
He has
Yeah.
bad internet. He's in Nauvoo and the connection is not. good.
Oh, that's where he's at. I was wondering what was going on because
Okay.
it didn't look like his normal
And I
place where
have
he is
news
at.
for you
My-
guys.
yeah.
I'm not going to sing us out tonight like Paul. normally
Oh, come on now.
does.
Deb, you can do that.
I'm sorry, not tonight.
Okay.
Okay.
Anybody
well, I
got
need
any
to
other
say goodnight.
questions? George, thank you so much for
Thank
hanging
you.
out and answering all the questions.
I hope you had enjoyed the ideas I shared with you. And thank you again for hosting me.
God bless y'all.
Bye. Thank you
Good
so
night.
much. Good night.